Welcome to the BBOWT podcast, our local nature-related podcast. Focusing on our three counties, Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, we'll be looking at what can be seen locally on your patch and also on what people can do to help wildlife in your own space.
So Andy, what's been your wildlife highlight of the last week?
I think for me, it's been seeing the first swallows. I always really enjoy this time of year because the swallows are coming back and the house martins and things like that, and it's just sort of gives you a bit of a lift, doesn't it? I walk my dog every morning, so I try and get out before most people are out, although that seems to be quite hard to predict at the moment. But yeah, just watching the swallows over the meadow, it's just been a real kind of, it's really sort of lifting my spirits quite a lot, I have to say. How about yourself?
Me, I'm kind of fortunate. If I just turn right out of my front door and just walk a few minutes down the road, it's the River Thames. It's actually a BBOWT nature reserve as well, which is quite fortuitous. And it's lovely at the moment. Just the lane down there at the moment, it's just like bursting to life. You've got all the leaves and all the blossom just exploding into life. So I think that's my highlight of the week. Spring, I think, is upon us. So what about you, Liz?
It definitely feels like spring is springing, doesn't it, at the moment? I was on a walk this morning with the dog actually, and I came across myself in the middle of an argument between two blackbirds and a magpie, and I just stood there for a couple of minutes actually, just watching them have this argument. It was really nice to see. Obviously, the magpie was being a bit of a pain to the blackbirds, but it's just so nice and so quiet at the moment that actually you can just take time to notice things like that. Really lovely.
Yeah, such a lovely time of year, isn't it? And yeah, it's nice to be able to just get out for that kind of hour or a day just to get a little bit of a dose of nature, isn't it? And kind of enjoy it. So that kind of leads me on to so this is our pilot podcast. So none of us have done this before. We're using interesting video conferencing. We were just saying a minute ago, it'd be really nice if we were all sat around in the same room, but unfortunately we can't do that at the moment. So we're sort of giving this a bit of a go. And we're hoping that it will just be a really nice way of engaging with folks, giving them a little bit of access to nature and just general discussions around, wildlife gardening, what people can do in their own spaces and all of that sort of stuff, really. So how are we going to start this? How do we do it?
Oh, we should probably introduce ourselves first, shouldn't we? So should we just go around and, Andy, tell me about yourself. Who are you?
I'm Andy. I work for the local wildlife trust. I've worked there for getting on 10 years now, which always really surprises me, to be honest, when I think of that. I've had various jobs there. I'm currently working within the brilliant community team in Oxfordshire, with yourself, obviously, Ed and Liz. I guess my sort of reason for getting involved in all of this in the first place is kind of, it often comes from childhood, doesn't it? And I think, my earliest memories are kind of going to the park with my parents and sort of automatically going to the pond in the park in Bicester and looking at newts and things like that. And I was always kind of looking around me and not concentrating. I used to bump my head all the time because I was always looking at things. I think that's kind of stuck with me, really, and now I have the pleasure and joy of being able to kind of share that with other folks. So Liz.
Me again, Andy. You are so right. It all started in childhood with me. I grew up in Kent on a tiny little family-run farm, which is now long gone. And I just remember one of my first memories too is following my dad around the farm and him trying to tell me the difference between a sparrowhawk and a kestrel, because we'd always get them on the muck heap. And that's pretty much where the inspiration started, really, for me. I've been with the Wildlife Trust for 5 years, and I just really enjoy that making wildlife accessible to people, I guess. As the podcast progress, people will realise that my knowledge is quite inferior to your knowledge, the pair of you. But what I like to do is actually try and translate it to people, and try and involve people in all sorts of different ways. So yeah, hopefully we can make a real good go of these podcasts and get lots and lots of people excited about wildlife on their patch. How about you, Ed? Where did it all start for you?
Well, for me, yeah, I should say I'm Ed, so I'm first and foremost a community wildlife officer, as well as then part of the same community team as you both, usually based up in our Oxford headquarters, but obviously at home currently, like the rest of us. So yeah, I mean, I've had a lifelong passion for and interest in the natural world. I was fortunate enough to grow up in North Devon, in Tarka country. So Tarka's fictional birthplace was pretty much opposite the house I grew up in. So, and it's really the local wildlife I like. It's sort of the birds, the animals, the plants, trees I kind of see on my local patch that for me contribute most to my enjoyment of the natural world. I think that, and it's the natural world that I think remains my sort of main source of wonder and inspiration. And yeah, it's just a real privilege to be able to, work in conservation, help protect our wildlife, restore precious habitats, and try and educate people about wildlife too.
Yeah, lovely. Well, yeah. So, I mean, the podcast really is just, as we said before, we're going to look at several different subjects really, and today we're sort of, just having a bit of a chat about, why is your space important? What can you kind of do to help wildlife and encourage it into your space? So whether that's out, you're out just enjoying it, you're out in the park for a walk, or you're fortunate enough to have a garden and you can go out in your garden and encourage it. So we'll kind of start with that, I think. So why is it important? Do you think?
Well, I think, isn't it? Well, I mean, obviously, the natural world is in trouble. We can come and talk about that a bit more in a moment. But why is it important? Well, I think a lot of our experience, isn't it, sort of our modern experience, is that human spaces are kind of created and maintained by excluding and checking natural processes. Mm-hmm. You look at, you only have to go down to the local garden centre and see shelves of insect killer, weed killer. There's this soul destroying trend at the moment for like artificial lawns and decking, and I'm sure we can do so much better than that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's also it's that thing about gardening with wildlife, or encouraging wildlife in your space. It's so much more enjoyable than trying to shut it out. I mean, you could literally, some people, and everybody knows one, will do absolutely everything to prevent any wildlife being anywhere near their garden. So like dandelions and things, there's been quite a lot of stuff on Twitter at the moment just saying how beneficial dandelions are. Is there any problem with leaving dandelions in your lawn? I mean, they're a lovely, bright, early flower, aren't they?
Yeah, and they support so much wildlife as well. I can't remember the exact figures, but it's hundreds of insect species depend on dandelions.
It's really nice actually when you head out in the local park or something, and the local space hasn't been mowed, and you just walk across it, and you can actually just hear the buzz, can't you, almost of the first bumblebees emerging and using the dandelion as a food source. They're a very very unrepresented plant, I guess, and a great resource for early insects, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely been noticing with the less mowing going on. There's kind of these little mini mini nature reserves popping up all over the place, isn't there? And it is that thing at the moment, because you're walking. Most people are walking out; they're not driving anywhere, so they really are kind of absorbing their local space. And certainly, from my point of view, even the roadsides, I've been really noticing them, and it's been lovely to see what's been allowed to grow. And so, yeah, kind of hoping for a bit longer without any mowers on the verges, because hugely beneficial as well, aren't they? And yeah, it's been lovely to see.
Yeah. I guess that's a really nice thing actually as well. The first thing that you can do in your own space is basically just to leave it to grow. Have a little bit of a wild area in the corner of the garden, even if you wanted a bit of a lawn. But as you say, just enable things to grow a little bit more, and just leave some more time before cutting, because wildlife will absolutely utilise it.
Yeah, maybe now's a good time to talk about what we mean by wildlife gardening as a phrase, because I think, like other phrases like sustainability or rewilding, it's got a little bit baggy with overuse. I think it means different things to different people. And I guess you'd say what it doesn't mean. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of your herbaceous borders. It doesn't mean letting nettles take over your garden and everything going to rack and ruin. And it probably means just adapting what you're already doing, and probably looking to, you'd want to encourage wildlife to visit. So there's some basic requirements that you want to fulfill, but you can certainly do that in the strictures of probably what you're doing now. So I'm thinking probably, Andy's put his hand up.
No. Sorry, Ed. I just thought I was just going to add to that, really. Yeah, completely. I think it's always that thing, isn't it? When often think about this when people move house, and they want to do something to their garden straight away, and it's just that thing of, something that we certainly learned to do working on nature reserves is you've got to get to know it first, haven't you? And it's sort of that thing, just having a look what's there, but taking a bit of stock and looking at what things are already using your gardens, and where you might be able to create opportunities for other things to use it is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. I mean, and the requirements are pretty basic, aren't they? They're the requirements for us and all living things. So you want to provide food, you want to provide some water, shelter, and a place to breed. And we appreciate not everyone has the space to provide all of those things, but you don't need to. But just by providing some of those things, you're going to bring your garden to life.
I guess it's really important as well to remember that your the space that you've got, whether that be a windowsill or whether that be a garden, is basically one part of a wider network as well, isn't it? That is so important for the connectivity of basically space for wildlife habitat, so they can move around and as you say, Ed, finds the water and the food and the shelter and the mates.
Yeah, I mean, completely. I mean, I mentioned before in passing about nature is in trouble, and I guess we do have to acknowledge, as depressing as it is, that the natural world is in trouble. The most recent State of Nature report, and for those of our listeners not familiar with that, every couple of years, the conservation organisations like ourselves, the Wildlife Trust and the RSPB and the Butterfly Conservation Trust, we all get together and we pool our sort of survey work and our research to produce a report, which pretty much does what it says on the cover. It's State of Nature, and you can find this online. It's free. It's available. If you just you put into a search engine "State of Nature 2019," you can download the PDF and read it. But I mean, it is pretty depressing reading. Britain remains one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And I think we're sort of 189th out of 219 countries for the intactness of our wildlife in the country. And you've got that horrible litany that we can probably all reel off the top of our head. We've lost 98% of our wildflower meadows and half of our ancient woodland, and 60% of lowland heaths and virtually all of our lowland fens and mires, and tens upon tens of thousands of miles of hedgerows. And it's not just the habitat that's lost, is it? I think it's all the species that live in those habitats are either declining or gone.
Yeah.
So sad. And I think, there's been acknowledgement, hasn't there? I think that, nature reserves on their own are simply not enough anymore to stop that. I think it was the Michael McCarthy, the writer, I think calls it the great thinning, which I think is a really evocative phrase. So we need to look at habitat restoration, and on a much wider scale, on a landscape scale. And BBOWT and the Wildlife Trust, we have a living landscape project where we work with farmers and other landowners, businesses. Oxford City Council, for example, sort of Andy, you and I work with the council to manage some really lovely sites in Oxford. But we can't do it on our own, and gardens are actually an amazing resource and potentially a really vital refuge for some of our beleaguered wildlife.
Yeah, definitely. There's the opportunity, really, isn't it? I mean, it's never fun listening to all of those facts, and it really sort of brings it home, doesn't it? But we've got to think in this, a new way, haven't we? And the opportunities are there for us to, influence and change that. So yeah, I mean, I think, like you were saying, Ed, all of the kind of wider countryside work that we do, it all comes down to, everything is influenced by people, and one of the places that people can really, really make a impact is on their own patch. So, I mean, if you're looking at kind of in terms of scale, the number of gardens, you're looking at an area 7 times the size of the Isle of Wight for, the amount of gardens that are there, which is more than all of the nature reserves in the UK combined. So that's massively impactful, isn't it, if you think about it in that way? And as you were saying, Liz, it's the connectivity that provides. Think about the diversity in all of the parks and gardens that are, just even in your local area, certainly around me. As I said before, I love just going for a wander around, just seeing how different things are and looking at all of the little habitat opportunities that are there. So
yeah, you're so right, Andy. When you start putting it into the context of the scale of gardens, it just goes to show how much of an impact we local people can have on wildlife with actually not very much effort at all either. It really rings it home. And I guess that's the idea of these podcasts too, in that each week we'll take a different subject and we'll cover a subject like ponds, for example, or something like that, just to give a bit more insight to people as to what they can do on their own patch.
Yeah, and there's some fantastic resources that we've got available. I think the Wildlife Trusts have had an ongoing project with the Royal Horticultural Society and the RHS. It's called Wildabout Gardens, and if you go into the website www.wildaboutgardens.org.uk, each year we produce a leaflet on a different focus. This year it's butterflies, and they're really beautifully produced leaflets. Lots of information on the sort of natural history and the life cycles of butterflies. Your plants you can put into your garden to attract butterflies. Interesting little snippets of facts. I think there's one that a caterpillar in a few weeks grows 10,000 fold, which is the same as like a human child growing to the size of a sperm whale.
That's
and
terrifying.
It is quite frightening, yeah. You got that to look forward to. Yeah, I mean, they're great resources. Not only they're really interesting anyway, but if you're at home, and they're a fantastic education resource if you've got kids as well. So do go and check them out. And I think previous years there's there's leaflets on hedgehogs and bees, ponds. I think there's worms, isn't there? Compost, and I think there's possibly one more that I can't recall. But yeah, they're all free. You can download them as PDFs. So yeah, do go and check them out. They're full of some really fantastic advice. And perhaps in future podcasts, we'll look at some of them and we'll talk about some of those subjects in a little bit more depth about how to attract wildlife into your garden.
Yeah, definitely. The those resources are brilliant, and certainly, when we're doing events out in the community, we do quite a lot of events in parks and things, and those, if we've got those in printed form, they always fly out, to be honest. And people really like them. Like you say, they're really simple, and they've got some really simple actions you can take. So like you were saying, it's for example, butterflies. They've all got food plants, and they're all things that grow in the countryside. They're also things that we can supplement in our gardens, just by planting a different type of hedge rather than, a lot of people use laurel and things like that. If you look at the beautiful native trees that we have in the countryside, you can bring them into your garden and have them as a hedge instead and things like that. So there's really nice little practical ideas. And like you say, loads of great stuff to do with kids as well. So yeah, there's those. And then we've also got on our website, www.bbowt.org.uk/actions. We've got a load of stuff on there of things you can do in your garden as well. So and also we're always really happy to speak to people, so do get in touch with us if you've got questions. You've got things we'd like to cover in this podcast. We've got lots of staff at BBOWT and with a lot of wide range of knowledge, so we're always happy to talk to people, and it'd be really nice to engage with people, because that's kind of something we're missing a bit at the moment, I have to say. It's lots of video calls and not as much interaction with folks, so we always love to hear from people.
There's nothing quite like being face to face with someone and having a conversation, is there? And inspiring, and as nice as it is to see everybody on Zoom, I can absolutely say that we're all definitely missing that kind of face-to-face local contact, and that's one of the things that we're also trying to achieve with this podcast. So if you've got any questions around wildlife gardening as well, do please use social media and the hashtag BBOWT podcast, BBOWT podcast, and send us in your questions. And then obviously when we record these podcasts each week, we will aim to answer any questions that come in.
Fantastic. Andy, so we're learning Zoom etiquette here as well. So I apologise for these occasional little silences. We're all kind of looking at each other in the screen. So who's going to speak?
It can be a bit tricky, can't it? So really, thank you very much everyone for listening. Thanks to you, Ed and Liz, for being on the podcast today. And until next time, stay safe, everyone. And don't forget about your daily dose of nature. It's pretty important at the moment.
I'm off to get mine now, I think.
Good shout. It's lunchtime, isn't it?
It certainly is. And the sun is nearly shining. So time to get that daily exercise in, I think, and head down to the river.
Definitely get outdoors and soak it up. Well, we will be back next week.
You have been listening to the BBOWT podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. For more information about your local wildlife trust and how to join us, please visit www.bbowt.org.uk.